funny place because we value those things less, but the world typically tries to make those the points of distinction and make us think that those are things that we should value as well. And I came to this understanding because I started to understand and realize that I was not always black. I'm not going through a reverse Michael Jackson thing. There's no procedures. There's none of that stuff. But what I mean by that is simply this. In 1970, October 30th, at 2:52 in the afternoon, I was getting kicked out of the best hotel I have ever been in. So the doctor is there and he's pulling me out and he turns me upside down and he smacks me. And I do what any good self-respecting person would do, and I slap the doctor back. That's an old Richard Pryor joke. It's the only Richard Pryor joke I can tell. So the doctor hands me over to the nurse, and the nurse puts me on the scale. She takes my vitals. She stamps my heel for the little piece of paper, and then she gets to the part of her task, of her checklist, that changes my life forever. The category on the list that says race. Now, in 1970, there were 3 options for the nurse, and there was black, white, and other. So the nurse looks at me, she looks at my mom, she looks at her list, she looks at my mom, she looks at me, and she makes her decision. Guess what she checks? Black. So here's the profound piece about that. This is the part that surprises me the most in terms of how I think about myself and how the world interacts with me. I wonder what my life might have been like had she checked something else. I think about that. I wonder, would my life be different had she checked something else? The other thing that I wonder, I'll get your hand in just a second. The other thing that I wonder is, what was I before she made that distinction? And what was I? I was human. I was born human, but America made me black. You were born human before you were given a category. You were born perfectly who you are supposed to be before they said you had to have X, Y, and Z, before you had to have a certain kind of education, or you had to look a certain way, dress a certain way, act a certain way. You were born perfectly human. And then something happened. And so what I want us to remember is, above all else, we are human first. It was funny, I was doing my boys group just before I came here out in St. Michael. So I drove from St. Michael all the way down here. And so my boys group is, I have a bunch of 8th graders that I'm working with. And so I meet with them once a week, and we didn't meet on Wednesday because of the fake snowstorm. So they canceled all this stuff, so I did my session this morning to kind of make up for that. And it was very interesting because an activity we're going to do, I was doing with them. And they wanted to know, why was I working with law enforcement folks? Why are you going to work with, corrections folks? Aren't they the enemy? And I guess if you're a juvenile delinquent, that might be true. But I asked him, I said, well, what do you think an officer, a correctional officer, a sheriff, a police officer, a probation officer, what do you think their primary job is? That's what I asked them. I said, what do you think their primary job is? And so they gave me a bunch of answers. And so I want to ask you, what is your primary job? To keep others safe? Welfare and safety checks? Make rounds. PCI, okay? I'll tell you what your number one job is. To go home at night. For me, once I understood that the officers that are pulling me over, or the officers that are working with my kids and sometimes harassing them, once I started understanding that their primary goal is to go home, I understood their behavior. Because I'm going to tell you, I'm going to do whatever I need to do to what? Go home. But guess what the people who we interact with, guess what their primary objective is as well? To also go home. To also go home. And so if we both have the same goals to go home, then there's really no conflict. We really have no problems. But our methods of trying to get there may in fact be different. And so we're so much more alike than we are different, although we may have different methods of trying to accomplish those things. All right? I did see your hand, sir, so I want to go ahead and take your hand. Yeah. Yeah, and it's really interesting because even in the United States we have these designations, and if they were real, they should follow folks all throughout the planet. Hispanic here or white here should be the same, white all over the place, but it's not the same. Racial categories, racial designations change from country to country all the time. But we'll get a chance to talk about that too. All right? I'll need somebody to log me on when I get a chance. I'm sorry I'm talking so much. Any